Hello, good morning. On my main channel, British Expat in the Philippines. This morning I went for a early morning stroll up the road and I stopped at I suppose I would call it a forgotten subdivision that is now becoming maybe a bit more noticed. I was always attracted by a sign on the wall of that subdivision. I'll call it a subdivision, but basically a piece of subdivided land with a main entrance to it. It's not what I would describe as a gated community yet. It may well end up that way. But I was attracted to the sign here in the Bulacan region of San Rafael, and it talked about 3.75 million pesos. Whether that's an old price or it's the current price, I'm not sure. But I thought, yes, let's have a look at it. Let's show you. Let's just give you a basic idea what that amount of money will buy you here in the Philippines. Not necessarily in Boracay or Makati, but certainly here in a regional city, maybe 1 hour's drive from the big smoke of Manila. But it also prompted me, after having done it, to come here to you to share this little snippet of information from my point of view. Those that don't know me, maybe I've never told you, but I used to be one of those things called a property developer back in the distant past, both in New Zealand and also in Australia. In many forms. I used to buy and sell of my own properties. I used to buy multiple properties and sell. Residential generally. But in doing so, I built up an understanding of the property market in two countries, using the same understanding and skills that most countries apply. Here in the Philippines, of course, it is a different environment, in the sense that property is not seen the same way as in the West. Many of you, especially Americans, talk about buying a property here, flying here for 3-4 months and going back and leaving the property rented out. Well, of course, that's everybody's individual decision. But one thing that you have to have is you have to have a market. You have to have the right kind of people to rent the property. And as a foreigner, we don't always have the understanding of who our market really is. Many have dreams anywhere in the world of living in a nice home, but often that is not achievable by many, because after all they may sign a lease for 12 months and then find difficulty finding someone to take over when they realise that maybe it's not what they wanted, the wrong area, or they just simply can't afford it. And as the landlord, you are left with a property that you may end up having to re-spend money refreshing and tidying up after the last tenant. So renting is not always the best for somebody in property. In the West, many people build as owner-builder or property speculation. They build for spec. In other words, they build for an emerging market. They may pick an outer suburb of a big city where the general trends are to move to that outer rim of the city and become a commuter. But of course, for overseas people would understand that most people would go to a bank, raise a mortgage against the property, against their own assets maybe, as security and a sizable deposit to keep the repayments at an affordable level. But in the Philippines, of course, most people buy cash. So they're in a position, generally speaking, to do away with mortgages. They may have sold another property and downsized. They may have had an inheritance that has enabled them to have the cash to do it. But like cars, no, not a lot of people pay cash. They're all on time payment. Those that do pay cash are generally wealthy people, maybe foreigners as well. But back to houses. One thing that you always have to remember, if you're going to build a home here in the Philippines and you intend maybe one day to rent it out, or even when you're passing, that you hope that your wife will have it as an income earner to help her through her own life after you're gone. There has to be, you can have your dream to have a home perched on the top of a beautiful mountain, overlooking the bay and the sea, or even just the mountain. But you have to have somebody also that wants to share that dream and can afford to live there. Otherwise you have an empty house that nobody can afford to rent. We own it, we have no outgoing except taxes. So the only thing really we need to know is that they're a good tenant and that they cover the cost of maintaining that property over each year. Now some of you of course will purchase a property or a piece of land with your wife's name in a town or a city which is up and coming, a centre of tourism and interest to people, beyond just being the name of a town or a city. And that makes good sense, because if there's a demand for a property, then there's, generally speaking, always going to be tenants out there. But I think we also need to remember that our expectation of rent you cannot just divide the capital figure and expect a certain amount of return, because it just doesn't happen here. Even in commercial properties, the return is nowhere near the kind of return that you get overseas. And it's also, you can have a very successful business on the surface of something to rent a commercial property, and then suddenly you find that the company's gone out of business and you've maybe been the one that built the property to design for that tenant originally, or that type of tenant, and now you're left with a white elephant where the only way to rent it is on short term to people who don't have the wherewithal to pay the kind of rentals that you would have had in maybe the original tenant. So my message to you all is to be very prudent in the way you approach any kind of property that you think you may well end up wanting to rent. The same with a condo. There's such a lot of condos all over the Philippines, in different cities, different regions, certainly in Manila, Baguio and Cebu, that there's an amazing array of properties available. Hence the price you can expect to get in rent or even resale, it will probably surprise you, not in the positive way either. So just be very careful when you make that decision. Make the decision based upon common sense. You're not going to make millions of dollars owning property here. What you have to try and teach your Filipina, because after all it's going to be in her name really. She's going to be the beneficiary of all of your efforts and ambitions, hopefully. You have to decide on where you're going to build, how close it is for her and her friends and family to be. You don't want to poke yourself away in some jungle spot where nobody will be able to visit her and she won't feel comfortable living when you're not here. Might be you're going back to America, Australia, England for work, maybe for periods of time just because you just can't handle living here full term. But whatever happens, you don't want to leave her with a white elephant either. You want to leave her in somewhere where she can enjoy that benefit that you're able to bring to the table. And you also need to remember that she needs to feel comfortable in the home that you've decided will be your retirement venture. So that's just my thought for the day. I hope that resonates with some of you and that you take the time to don't jump straight in just to build something because you want to do it to please her or even yourself. Think about the ongoing probabilities of maybe resale, maybe rental, maybe just being somewhere she will call home after you're gone. Bye now.